Hi guys, thanks for tuning in. For the last year or so, I've been doing a lot of free time study on economics and looking at economic information and theories and things like that. In part born of my, natural low socioeconomic status and the struggles that come with that. Makes me interested in that sort of stuff. Anyway, so the topic tonight is my take on wages in the United States. So, arguments against commanding adequate wages for workers are often framed in the notion of socialism, and it's also argued that this would cause inflation. And at a certain point, inflation could result, but the way that you slice through that smokescreen is by referring to a measure called the national productivity rate, meaning what resources our economy is producing compared to the wages per capita of that productivity. And that has declined in the last few decades substantially, hasn't kept up with increase in productivity. So basically, I would guess that most companies, based on that information, if they run a good business model, could stand to boost wages of lower paid workers by maybe 15 or 30% without reaching that threshold that would trigger inflation, all else equal. And this would provide better material and food security for workers without being enough to necessitate raising prices. There isn't really such a thing as a free market, but more freedom is better. However, the fourth turning theory, which is a theory you can read online by various authors, argues that at this particular stage in affairs, we are coming off of several decades of reduced civic activity and kind of a individualist attitude in culture, and that lack of civic mindedness is probably part of why wages have been suppressed and there hasn't been a lot of worker protection and workers' rights compared to maybe 60, 70 years ago. So the debate is about minimum wage, and yeah, sure, I guess there should be some standard, but a healthy civic-minded society would actually spare adequate wages when possible, even, in the absence of strict minimum wage laws. I'm not sure, how important the law itself is versus just the civic-mindedness of providing, wages when your company can spare the money for your workers. And so countering the idea that raising wages necessitates inflation on the opposite end of knowing that a population with adequate access to currency can therefore afford to pay businesses enough to keep the fucking lights on. Furthermore, with regards to the current state of affairs, is a gander at the M2 money supply. It's a measure of money supply in this country, and there's also, case in point, the M2 money velocity. The velocity is actually a measure of what dollars in existence are like circulating the economy versus just stashed somewhere. That's how many dollars are changing hands regularly with time. In reality, the vast, staggering increase to the money supply since 2009 has devalued the currency in reality to about 1/3 of its 2009 value, as reflected by the price of gold. Everyday prices haven't gone up quite as severely. Inflation hasn't been that severe. But if you think inflation was bad recently, it pales in comparison to what it would have been if all that increase in money supply had remained circulating in the economy, in the M2 velocity. I think inflation would have been much worse if the recent M2 money velocity looked anything like it did back in, say, like year 2000, when M2 velocity was much higher. Actually, a large portion of those printed dollars are not in everyday people's pockets. Nope, they are not circulating the economy. A portion of them are stashed in various investment funds, Fed balance sheet, high yield savings products of a small fraction of wealthy people, whatever. And it could be argued that some of these surplus dollars are more so possessed by maybe the top 10% of citizens, while most people in reality are in serious debt with a negative real worth. M2 velocity is much higher in the late 20th century and the beginning of the century compared to what it is now. I don't know the fine details, but I would suspect that a relatively low money velocity is in part a reflection of the current era of income and wealth inequality, at least to some extent, as the vast majority of workers see a relatively limited amount of dollars flow through their bank account. Even if you argue that certain generations are spending or doom spending or spending too much on nice things, really, like think, for example, spending too much on a new car. Well, a new car can be expensive, but the way it is today, your alternative is you don't have much far down the scale to go before you wind up with something that's actually not reliable and costs you more in the long run. Since a lot of people who buy cars nowadays, they don't always put the recommended maintenance into them. They just use them for a few years and then trade them in, and that they dump that off on the next buyer of that used car. So, with the products that are available for things like driving and things like food and whatnot, what some argue is doom spending or spending beyond your means is really just doing the basics. Like, I mean, I'm not, that behind the argument that like the younger generations are not financially responsible. Yes, some people are not financially responsible, and they travel too much when they don't need to, or they spend too much. But with the housing supply on the market that we have today, and other factors, the currency devaluation, I think that it could be argued that companies could raise wages by 15 to 30% for the lower half of workers without it necessitating a responding rise in prices. And with that being said, I appreciate your time. I hope that my information was useful and accurate. Like I said, I haven't been doing official research for a university or anything. I've just, this video is made after months and months of reading different resources. So that's it. Thank you again.